that.
All right. Well, good afternoon, good morning to some that are still in the West Coast. Welcome to the Beehive. For the folks that don't know Beyond Academics and the Beehive, we host a set of topics that really impact higher ed. We are very collaborative. We use a lot of crowdsourcing. We believe higher ed needs to change, and we believe that the way that they change is really to educate folks on what the modern technologies are. We really focus on future of work and what the campuses do in the future, the work of the future. We are helping campuses just reimagine themselves as opposed to just doing transactional stuff that we've always done. I've been in higher ed for about 3 decades, ran a registrar's office. A lot of our offices today are still doing the things I did in the 90s. And so part of Beyond's mission is to really get people to use the technologies that they have. We're software agnostic. So while we are doing a Slate session today, for us, it's the concept, it's the strategy. It's how do you make your campuses become more effective? So today we have David Dysart, who will be leading the conversation. Gabrielle and I usually co-host and facilitate this, but we have a bunch of other folks from our group, JTH, to Joy, to Nicole, that you will see that we all chime in. I see Carl there. So you'll see people that are just regulars in our session.
And watch out, he'll call on you, so be prepared. No.
I won't call on you, but I encourage you to be a part of our conversation.
You have the right to talk, and you have a right not to talk.
Yeah. So the hashtag we use is Your Voice Matters. We believe that not everyone's voice is heard in the transformations that we really need to consider. So a lot of times, we put in student systems, and the loudest voice always got the attention. That's not the way that we think it should be. We believe that everyone's voice matters. There is opinions, there is ideas, and part of that is part of the activities we're doing. So, so today's conversation is really brought to you by David. David, why don't you give us a little bit of the topic, and then I'm going to dive in a little bit in terms of what does that mean strategically for these campuses. And then, of course, David's going to walk in and go through the logic of it. Gabrielle, go ahead. I see that you.
So really quick, because I know that I'm not going to have a chance to speak after this. For everyone that's here, you are welcome to turn on your cameras if you'd like to be on screen. You are welcome to just interrupt Matt at any time. And you are welcome to also raise your hand. I didn't realize if you raise your hand, it actually makes the hand feature go up, or you could raise it by, clicking the little dots in the top right of your screen, so we can make sure that we get to you. And we'd also love to hear your voice if you don't want to talk. If you want to go ahead and drop some notes or thoughts in the chat, I really encourage you to have the chat open while this is going on, because you will see folks who are just writing out their ideas, their experiences, their questions. So we'll have a voice in the chat. That'll be me. Sometimes I'm not as effective at getting every single little thing in. So if I miss you and you really need me to bring something up, just please know that it's not intentional. But there's usually so much amazing conversation in the chat, which is why I encourage you to be a part of that as well. And I think that's it. So
yeah, well, thank you. So David, when you brought this topic up to us, what was it that drove you to this topic?
Yeah, so we had talked about the modern admission office, and I think this particular series of workshops on engagement scoring and predictive modeling, I think that is really an important element to the modern admission office, especially in how we can craft student-centered programming for them, the efficient use of resources, and then also just improving the institutional strength, both financially and just in the minds and hearts of students. And I think it does that in a lot of different ways. And I'm really excited to hear what the group also has to say about things that they're doing, things that they're excited for in kind of the world of admissions and Slate and scoring and modeling.
You know, for the audience that's here, there's this reaction button on the bottom of Zoom. How many of you are using engagement scoring right now in some capacity at your campus? Just give us a reaction, or you could open up your camera or your mic and just say, hey, we use it. So I see that OSU Medicine uses it. Because their names don't always associate to the school, you may have to say it in the chat or just speak it to us. Just a handful? Okay.
Yeah, and really what prompted me to do it was Slate had a feature. It was a web page that I called Slate Predict. I didn't actually see it working, and then eventually the web page went away. So I figured I can do some predictive modeling, and it's once you have the model built, it's pretty simple math to replicate it. And the process we're going to do today about engagement scoring, it's basically the same process as running the predictive model. So I learned how to do engagement scoring, and then I added the predictive modeling. So it's a really exciting use for Slate that the lift to impact, I think, is a really good ratio. I can make a really big splash at these colleges.
So that's one of the big things I think we're trying to get campuses to recognize is that you could actually make really big transformation if you're strategic about it, if you start using the tools that you have. I presume a handful of you, or a lot of you, but probably are Slate users, so this is going to come in handy. But the concept of predictive scoring should be used everywhere, right? So when we think about modern admissions offices, can someone define that for us? Like, what do you all consider a modern admissions office in today's world? What do you guys consider that? Anybody?
You can drop it in the chat too.
Yeah. If not, I'm going to call one of my friends that I know can speak to it.
Can you define modern maybe from your lens?
Well, I think that's part of it, right? Like modern shouldn't be my definition. It should be what you all experience as modern, right? So what would modern be to, what is a modern, what does students think modern is? Anybody? JTH? Technology,
Alice said
data-driven.
technology.
I'm
Yep.
always struggling with my mute button. No, I think that modern is something that is hyper responsive to your needs, not to the needs of the organization, so much as being able to anticipate what you as the customer or you as the student wants and be able to deliver that quickly, seamlessly, and without any sort of friction. Often without even talking to a person. I mean, if I have to call and talk to somebody, I feel like that I've been thrown in the past and that what I'm working on has failed. I look at it as, all the different things that we use. I mean, think about everything from Netflix to Uber, everything we do is fast, electronic, anticipates your needs, remembers what's happened in the past, so I don't have to tell it over and over again, and then understands based on what I've done what I need to do next.
Yes, I see Allegra said high tech and accessible. I see Alice said specific resources assigned to students. So this is that whole personalized work. This less manual, labor intensive workflow. Lindsay said that. Nicole said personalized. Hannah, you said that's the way we've always done it. So what is the phrase that you never use that phrase? That's the way we've done it. So are you saying a modern campus doesn't say we did it the old way? Is that what you're saying, Hannah, in that statement?
I'm sure that some of us have run into this, but whenever we try to implement change and we say, well, why aren't we doing it this way? Or why aren't we adapting to this new way? The response is, well, that's the way we've always done it. And people are perfectly fine with that. So the never accepting the status quo or of, well, we've done it like this for 100 years and it's working just fine. Why should we change?
Yeah. So it's interesting. In the old model of transformation, everything is requirement gathering. We did it the way we did it last year in our legacy system, so we got to keep doing it, right? So that is what everyone is so used to in IT. That's how systems are set up. But the opportunity when we think about design thinking, and I don't know if you all know what design thinking is, but you actually put the human in the center. Like, what does the human need? And you design around that. You look at their aspirations, you look at their needs, you look at their wants, and then what are the friction points that they're currently going through? And if you address that, then it'll really become a big thing. William, I saw you had your hand raised. You want to chime in?
Yeah, well, JTH said something, and I think admissions looks different for each student, but also where the student is currently. Like my oldest is an incoming freshman, and what she needed out of admissions is a lot less, or is a lot more than what a senior who's already been going to school and already kind of knows the ropes. So I think admissions needs for our modern admissions, I think it's really gearing towards the incoming class and showing them how to do things, and figuring and being responsive, but also being part of an adult is also knowing how to ask for help. So I think the admissions office needs to be able to balance that a little bit better than what they currently do, just waiting for an email or a chatbot to have a student ask a question, or a prospective student.
So someone in the chat said personalized, right? So
Yeah,
if you look at admissions offices today, and you look at it from the 90s and the early 2000s, it was a cohort admissions process. Everything was, a large application. You go through the process, but the way that loan applications today and things, it's very personalized to the actual constituent that it's addressing. So I do think modern is more personalized and less intuitive in terms of, I need all this data to make this decision, because different students have different needs, right? So I think it's a little bit of that conversation that we're really having also. So,
and being proactive instead of reactive. Why wait for a student to struggle as opposed to, reaching out to students beforehand who maybe are not responding to emails, who are not responding to text messages or other things, and saying, hey, we see you're interested in coming here, but you really haven't made any progress towards acceptance or something. Is there something you need help with? Maybe one of our videos on how to set up your network ID didn't make sense to you, or whatever it is. So what can we do to help you? Yeah.
So you went into data driven like strategies, right? I think that's where when you gotta address someone's need, data is what really is. Does most of your campuses struggle with data and getting to the data that you need to create the actions that you're going to be fostering, or do you all do data really well? Anybody?
I think there's also the element of, there is a lot of data floating around. Even if you do have access to it, it takes time and that kind of scaffolding and the strategy to like, okay, well, maybe you have ping setups, so you know they were on your financial aid page for 40 minutes last week. But if you don't have the time and the bandwidth to like build an email follow-up, or like, oh, we have not gotten an email from this committed student for the last 6 months, classes start tomorrow, that's probably a problem. But there's just so much data, it is hard to sift through what's important, what's going to be the biggest impact tomorrow that we can work on.
Yeah, and I see Allegra talks about the UI UX appearance. We do such a poor job in if we look at campuses. I saw one of our interns, she's actually in the house today. She showed us their mobile interaction. It's shameful. Like you shouldn't we shouldn't be putting our students through that process because we're still looking at it as a transactional system. How do I get someone from point A to point B in a transaction, right? The UX UI is about the experience and the right information at the right time, kind of thing. So let's move, David, into this conversation about targeting and personalization. When we think about engagement scoring, the real reason we're doing that is we got to figure out who it is that is going to, that we could target in a way that will be successful, right? Isn't that the whole purpose? So can you give us a little bit of why this is important in terms of personalization and targeting, so that your capacity is for things that are more fruitful?
Yeah, so I mean, there's going to be a lot of different schools who maybe their funnel is 10,000 students, maybe their funnel is 500,000 students. But typically the amount of staff they have available to work with those students also goes up and down. So I can't think of an admission office that says like, oh, we have a ton of time. We can call each one of our students and have a deep personal conversation with them. So, but you don't need to call 500,000 people, whether it's, the students that are very engaged or that are likely to apply or likely to enroll. That just gives you a list of students to help you prioritize those high touch efforts. Maybe that's a phone call, maybe that's a text message, or even starting to do predictive analytics on the best time to send an email or a text message, or the best return on investment for sending an ad to Spotify or TikTok or Instagram. There's so many recruitment efforts, yield strategies, support programs that a lot of times we're just kind of putting out there broadly, but we can really start using the data that we have to structure those a little bit more and send them to the students that are going to be more likely to need them or more likely to benefit from them. And just a tool like scoring, predictive modeling, that runs really well in Slate or another system. This is definitely not a Slate specific tool in any means. It's just, this is the platform we're using to demonstrate it right now. But yeah, it's just, it offers a little bit of guidance, a little bit of direction for the institution to use those resources, the time, the staff, in the most productive and impactful way.
How strategic are your campuses right now using, AI? And I just wanted to get into that really quick, because we're seeing AI coming into play in terms of being able to predict things based off of patterns. So how many of you, there's 47, folks here, how many of your campuses are starting to incorporate AI into some of your strategies? A thumbs up, or if you want in the chat, or if you want to speak, you certainly can open up too. Is that a quiet? Yeah, no, you're not using it? Not at all? Okay. Now, do you all want to use it, or do you think it's not ready? Okay.
I think Allegra has a really good point about AI chatbots. I think that there is so much power in an AI-driven chatbot, whether that's a conversation piece where a student can hop on the website, get questions answered. But at Acro a couple years ago, there was a school who was using basically a chatbot that was integrated into like the learning management system and everything, that could send nudges to students of like, oh, they had a poor grade on one of the pilot classes, so we're going to send like a tutoring resource, or we're going to send them, we noticed they didn't submit the FAFSA to return next year, but that's due in a week. So being able to leverage an AI chatbot or some kind of AI pane of glass over your data to be proactive in those nudges and to be a really responsive 2 a.m. question resource when maybe it's an international student, or maybe it's just a high school student up at 2 o'clock in the morning and we don't have staff on call at that time. So there's so many other really strong uses for AI that's not necessarily predictive modeling.
Got it. So part of the other conversations is you're using this for better yield rate, correct? I mean, I think that's the other concept, or is it to allocate resources to the right places? Which one is it, David?
I think that's going to kind of be determined by the institution. I think those are both really good uses for it. So maybe, we're not going to hit our head count. We're not projected to hit our head count, whether it's the enrollment cliff, whether it's pandemic effects, whatever it might be. So you can use the predictive analytics. So like, we're going to take this group of students that are 70% likely to enroll. We can pull up a Slate report with that group of students, and we're going to implement some kind of support programming or an email campaign, whatever it might be. And then we're going to assess, well, what was their yield for that group? Was it still 70%? Was it 80%, 60%? Now we have the insights that can drive what our future actions are going to be. But it also could just be, we have this group of 90% likely to enroll. Let's call all of them and make sure they all enroll, and we can shore up our headcount a little bit, or our net tuition revenue, whatever it might be. So I think there's a lot of uses, but it's definitely going to be targeted to the institutional needs and what they need to use this tool for this year versus we'll try something else next year as well.
So is predictive modeling used for retention too? Is it more than just admissions that you could predict things to address retention risks?
Yeah, definitely. This could be a current student retention thing. We could model on other behaviors, like how likely students are to attend an event, how likely students are to be successful in this class or in this major. Could be in the advancement office, how likely these alumni, these parents, these companies are to donate, or just other forms of engagement with the campus. There's a lot of uses for it, and once you plug it into something like Slate or another system, it really opens up a lot of the strategy piece of it.
Hey, Gabrielle, I see your hand raised.
Hey, I just wanted to be the little timer here. We've got about 6 minutes, so we need to transition into the next segment. So maybe let's start to wrap this up.
Yeah. All right. Cool. So so if it is more than just admissions, is that something campuses are doing now, or is it something you're saying, David, they should start doing?
I am not too sure as a whole how many institutions are leveraging, whether it's Slate or another system, predictive analytics. If they're doing it in-house, if they're going to a separate company to help with it. But I think that this is a really important element in just a general data-driven environment and ecosystem. So once you start doing it, it's much easier once you have that kind of initial lift. You have the staffing or the team members or the consultants on board to start building this and empowering your staff to use it across the board.
Got it. And I think there is real power when you use strategies collectively across the campus. So I think that's one of the big things that we always say to schools is, how do you not just, that it is an enterprise strategy, not just a siloed for a particular campus, because that'll allow you to get resources that are supporting many more things during that part. So I know the session is really a little bit of a hands-on, and we're going to drive that. So David, why don't we move to that? As we said to you all, it's an open mic. So at any point in time, if you have questions, just unmic and have a conversation with us. David is certainly able to answer any questions you have. We are going to dive deeper into it. So if something doesn't make sense, definitely just say it and we can, walk you through that. But we really want some interaction if you really think, if you think that, you want to add some color to it. So go ahead, David.
I was also going to say, if you think about something, if there's something that you came here for to get out of this, if you want to go ahead and just pop it in the chat, that way David can kind of just see it as he's kind of going along, and I can call it out if needed. But yeah, we want to make sure that, you know, this is dynamic for you.
And if you haven't figured this out, we're not selling anything. You know, our sessions is all about educating and getting people a community, building a community. As you'll see that we will start to host a set of these type of topics, both in the admissions, but for many other parts of the campus. So certainly, you know, follow us on LinkedIn and our website and so forth. But certainly, you know, our goal is to give you some thoughts and ideas, so you can take it back to your campus and incorporate it. Go ahead, David.
Well, thank you, Matt. Thank you, Gabrielle. Thank you for everyone who joined in on the earlier conversation. Yes, please, whether it's in the chat or coming off of mute, just let me know. We can stop. We can kind of go into something a bit more detailed. But this will be a very hands-on series of workshops. This is the first of 6. The first 3, we're going to be building automated engagement scoring. So, and then the next 3 will be on predictive modeling, really with the thought process of this is going to fast track you to be able to do it in-house yourself at your institution, whether that's in the admission office, more broadly across your campus. But we are really excited to launch the first Slate workshop today. So thank you all for joining for the inaugural workshop. I have presented on this topic at Slate Summit in Acro, but these will be much more hands-on. My name is David Dysart. I'm the Director of Data and Functional Systems Design here at Beyond Academics. I've worked at institutional research and admissions at large public institutions and small liberal arts, respectively. I spent a bit of time outside of higher education, but very glad to have refound my home in higher ed today with Beyond Academics and everyone here. So today, just as a quick agenda, we're actually going to start building the queries in configurable joins and kind of the formulas to build an engagement score in Slate, the source formats to automate the process, and then just some fields and calculations to kind of help ease the process as best practices. So next month, we'll be using Excel to actually build and apply points to the behaviors. The month after that, we'll be collaborating internally with your admission office to how to build the score internally and also how to use it to its best uses with your students. And then later on this year, we'll actually get into the predictive modeling side of this. We'll run for about an hour for these workshops, but please let me know if you have any questions. This is being recorded, so if you do share screen, just make sure you're using maybe a clean slate environment or just test data on your screen. But without further ado, configurable joins, and we're going to hop over to Slate. So if you have an instance of Slate, let's go ahead and hop into that right now. On the right hand of my screen, you can see I have, as an example, what we're going to be building in our configurable joins query. On the left-hand side is where we're actually going to build it from scratch. So you can use this as a reference if you want to work ahead, or we can work together here. So I just am in my queries. I have a sample query here built on the configurable joins person base, and we're going to build a dependent subquery. So this allows Slate to start aggregating, create formulas, do comparisons. There's a lot of flexibility with configurable joins. You might be able to do this in like a local or Slate template library, but I definitely wouldn't recommend that. You have a lot more power here and a lot more future-proof features, as Slate is really leading into configurable joins now. So we're going to call this export, which is going to be a column of data. We'll just do event score. We have a couple options here for a dependent subquery and independent subquery. We're just curious about data as it relates to our student, so we'll just leave that as a dependent subquery. We have a lot of different output methods. We're going to change that to a formula. There's going to be some behaviors that you use a formula with, some you'll use an exist, not exist. If we have some time at the end of the workshop, we'll definitely go back and do a couple more sample exports if that's helpful for everybody. So we do need to pull some additional data first. So I'll also click into this additional piece of data. We're going to do a a second dependent subquery. You could write a single dependent subquery that's really complicated and convoluted that kind of gets you what you need. That's not going to be super helpful if you're using this data, or if you're updating this data once a year, or if you leave the institution, or you're promoted, or you win the lottery, whatever it might be, and then someone else has to step into your shoes and work with this query. So I definitely lean towards more clearer dependent subqueries than one really complicated version. And that's also going to be helpful as I'm going to be making copies typically to do like in-person events versus on the road events versus virtual events. So having something that's very clearly defined is going to be easier than something that's really complicated. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of do this, but this will be the way we do it today. So we want to know the number of events that this particular student has attended. So we're going to do another formula. And now we need to basically say, what kind of events are we interested in? We're interested in in-person events. So in my, I'll pop this up here. In my instance of Slate, I'm going to be curious about in-person campus events, like a campus tour, but also self-guided tours. So we actually need to pull information from those form responses. In my instance of Slate, we're hosting those internally. We're not importing that data. So we're going to have to join to our form responses. So you're going to have two options here. You're going to have forms that are tailored to a person and forms that are scoped to application. The little wizard hat just means this is a complicated join to manage and just to be kind of cautious when you're doing it. So we're going to join to our person because that's, in my instance of Slate, our campus tours are scoped to the person record, not the application record. So you have a couple options here. You can tell Slate right now what specific forum or event or a template that you want to look at, or you can do it with filters. You can see the filters over here if you choose all events and forums. Again, given the amount of tweaks that you're gonna have to do to this process long-term of like, oh, I want to give the same number of points for a self-guided tour as an in-person tour versus an information session. It's a little bit easier to, and you have more flexibility with this all forms and event option. So these are just the actual form responses for the student. If you're going to then look at only campus tours or only self-guided tours, we need to do one more join to the form. So we'll just type form. So these blue headers are the different data tables that you have access to. So again, we're seeing the form responses to the person, to the application, but we've actually already joined to form responses. And we want to go to the form response, so basically the actual submission the student did, to the actual form. And this way, this allows us to filter it to the proper template. So we're going to do a filter, which is just telling Slate, I only want records that meet this criteria. And we're going to search for template. And you typically will want to use that direct filter as opposed to an extended filter, which is joining to a new data table. We've already done the join. Yes, Emily, this recording will be shared. And then we are looking at campus tours. So as you can see, we are pretty deep into the weeds on this export, but this is going to give us a count of all of the campus tours that the student has submitted. We're also only caring about events that the student actually attended. Maybe you want to give them points for upcoming events in which they're still going to be marked as registered. Or maybe you want to give them negative points for no showing your event without canceling it. But right now for this one, we're just caring about campus tours that the student actually attended. And this gets marked either manually by your staff, or if you have a virtual event and they're following the link that marks them as attended. Oh. And we just need to change this to aggregate, and it's count. So this is going to count every time that the student submitted a form response under the campus tour template and was marked as attended. And then because we did that all forms and events, we can just make a copy of it. We're going to change it from campus tour to self-guided campus tour. And all those filters look good. So we'll just change the name. It is very important to have very clear names for your exports, for your joins. That's going to save you a lot of headache as you look at 30 different versions of these exports and filters. So we can cancel out of this. So now we just want to get the counts of all the campus tours and self-guided campus tours that the student went on. So if you hit the @ symbol, Slate's going to give you free drop-down selection of your exports. So you can just click campus tours, and we're going to do so all the campus tours they attended, plus the @ symbol again, all the self-guided campus tours. So we're going to save that. So this new data point here is going to be all of those events that we specified of campus tours and self-guided. We can cancel that out. So this formula, we're going to do it a little bit more complicated than we need to. But this will kind of help error-proof your export and opens up some options down the road for more complicated scoring.
So,
So if you know, yes.
David, can you explain why this method is more complicated than, and what is more easier?
Yeah, so you can see the version of my formula here.
Yep.
It's several if statements. So if you wanted, so you could just do, again, reference your event counts and say, I'm going to multiply it by 5 points per event. So if they went to 2 events, they'd get 10 points. If they went to 5 events, they'd get 25 points.
Got it. Okay.
But the issue you could run into is if you have bad data in that exports, maybe it's the word 17, or maybe it's text, or maybe it's just something that's not coded correctly that you can do this kind of arithmetic. You're going to error out your query. So there's just some concerns there. And if you do want to do different types of scoring, or if you want to cap the number of points the student can get, so maybe they went to 10 events, but obviously someone who went to 10 events is not 10 times more engaged than someone who went to 1 event. Maybe they just learned you're doing demonstrated interest, so they went to as many events as possible to try to game the system, or maybe there just is returning interest on those. So you could do something as simple as this. It's just has some potential drawbacks.
Got it. And what I'm seeing is also there's just a cut and paste feature. So if you have done this a bunch of times in other, activities, you should be able to cut and paste it and then adjust, right? Because good coders are doing that, and now low code, no code is doing a lot of that. It's dropping in low code and then people just adjust. So this is that whole techno-functional office that we're saying has to be created, is that people that are functional. In the old days, I would never touch this, but today I can touch it, right? So that's part of it too. All right. Just wanted to make sure that I was understanding. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. That's good pause point. And I will say that is also another strength of Slate. You can build template queries so that someone does not have to recreate these or this kind of complicated exports. You can also build these exports into a library. So maybe you don't know the 7 complicated queries or 7 complicated exports that they're going to need every time, but they can have access to a scoring library. So when they do export, you can see I have a library export here of complicated configurable joins. I already have pre-built, and I can give this access to anyone in our instance of Slate. I can give it access to a small subset of people. So if you do have these really complicated exports or filters, you can pre-build them and make them accessible to your staff members who aren't going to be able to build them from scratch. So yeah, there's a lot of that kind of copy paste functionality in configurable joins that's super helpful. And also, I am going to, if I'm doing this process, this is kind of my base export. I'm going to save copies of this and do my school visit behaviors. I'm going to do my virtual event behaviors because everything is copy pasteable, and I can just point them to different templates, assign them different number of points. So it's a very flexible tool that has a lot of reusability. So we'll go through this a little bit more complicated formula real quick, which if you know something like SQL, this is like basically a really light version of SQL that just doesn't have all of the functionality accessible to you. So we're going to do a case when, which is just telling Slate, when this criteria happens, give me this value. So again, I'm going to just do that @ symbol. So when the number of events is greater than 4, so if they went to 5 or more events, then just give me the value of 24 points. And that's because I'm capping this at 24 points. I don't want any student who went to events to have more than 24 points, because I'm also going to cap this so the total score they can get with all behaviors is 100 points. So I feel 24 points is a good balance of in-person events contributing to my total score. And also, again, I just think people are going to start gaming events, or there's just returning value, I think, when someone going to more than 4 events. So if that does not describe the student, so maybe they went to less than 5 events, then I wanted to do another when statement. And then I can just use my @ symbol. When the number of events is greater than 0, then give me, I'll put this in parentheses, just again, you can do more complicated formulas down the road. And multiply it by, we're doing 6 points here. So again, if they went to 3 events, 3 times 6 is 18 points, or someone who went to 1 event, they get 1 times 6 is 6 points. So if none of this criteria matches, which will only happen really if they have 0 or some kind of bad value, then just give me a 0. Generally, I would recommend to always assign a number of points, whether that's 0 or an actual number. That's going to help down the road with calculating and formulas and your data imports. And then just an int, we're just going to say this is all I want this export to do. So that is going to be really the basis for your behavior scoring and configurable joins. Like I said, if we have time at the end of the workshop, we'll kind of talk about how to build scoring for messages sent by the students, submitting things like the FAFSA. But I do want to make sure we also talk about filters a little bit. As I mentioned earlier, there's going to be a lot of schools that have huge databases. You don't care about updating engagement scoring for your old records or possibly your very distant future records. You might only be curious about running this process on your current cycle and maybe your upcoming cycle of students, or maybe 2 cycles, whatever it might be. So we're going to build a filter that looks at just those kind of quote unquote active cycles. So we're going to just look at entry term. And again, I have this over here if you want to start working ahead. So again, we're going to have to join from the student data table to their planned entry. And we'll look at the fields and prompts real quick at that. So I would definitely recommend using something that Slate calls categories. So when you build your prompt values, so a prompt value could be spring 2022. You can also categorize this as a previous cycle versus maybe fall 2024 is a current cycle and fall 25 is next cycle. So this gives you a bit more flexibility. So maybe you're looking at your current cycle in 20 different queries, 15 different mailings, and 7 different reports. So every year, instead of having to then point to fall 25, the next year point to fall 26, you can update this to be current. And now all of your queries, all of your reports, all your mailings are going to actively tune in on students with this planned entry term.
So is that more of a default? Is that the way that I would think is it's like a default, so I know that I'm in the current term, so that then I can adjust it if I need to. Is that kind of what that's purpose for, David?
Correct. Yeah, I think that's the best way to do it. Kind of a default classification of the student. So if you're not using categories, especially on planned entry year, there's a lot of different uses of category. Maybe it's bucketing all of your STEM majors into STEM, or it's bucketing your social sciences into a social science bucket. It really allows you, especially for planned entry year, since not everything, since so many things are cyclical, like we send this email to students every year, and we only care about our default group of students, essentially. And just being able to update it on one page and have all of your reports, all of your queries, all of your mailings updated as soon as you update this page saves you so much time. So definitely look into using categories, especially in planned entry term.
So would they build a current value and then put the actual date? So would there be an administrator that puts the date of that current in there, or is one built every year?
So what you could do is you could build out, so I think in let me make this bigger. Our instance of Slate has planned entry term built out to fall 27. Typically, I've seen admission offices build out as far as a student would likely be in Slate. So maybe they're a freshman in high school. Like, you don't need to build out fall 2035 because the kid in preschool is not going to have a record in your instance of Slate. But you definitely want to have this built out enough to accommodate any student that might be in your instance of Slate. So maybe during cycle prep, you add fall 28, summer 28, spring 28. So you could then also just you could at that time update to categories. You could also use effective and expiration dates to make this available and visible during certain dates, which kind of gets at what Matt was talking about, having dates programmed in. You could also use translation codes as well, which gives you a kind of option of, given these dates, return these values. So there's a lot of different options. You can also just make these inactive and active, which changes their public facing availability. So there's a lot of different options. Probably one of the simpler ones and easiest to maintain is maintaining these categories, especially for things like reports, queries, mailings. It just gives you a lot of at a glance control.
Okay. Sorry if I'm asking basic questions. I was just trying to understand how the logic is used.
No, as someone who's used Slate for a lot of years, I don't want to speed past anything just because I've used Slate for a lot of years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So we're going to do a join. So we actually need to join to the data table that holds the prompt, so we can actually pull only current. So if we join to field values, so again, we can look at field values that are assigned to the person record or an application record. Planned entry year is something that's assigned to persons. So this is a one-to-many relationship, since there's a lot of fields that are tied to people. And then I'm going to do one more join to look up the prompt values. So you're going to have two options here, look up field and look up prompt. I care about the prompt values. So like I said, that category is programmed to spring 22. That category is programmed to fall 2024. So I want to look at the actual prompts themselves. So if you click look up field, it's just not going to show what you think it's going to show, so you can try again. So then I'm going to filter. I want to know, there you go. So in that field values table, there is a data point called ID. And if you go back to the prompt, that ID is this key. So it's planned entry term. Typically keys are going to be all lowercase, no spaces. So that ID is looking for the actual key of the prompt. And this would be as opposed to planned major, anything along those lines. And we'll look at for one more. We care about, we only want to pull the records that have a planned entry year of current and next year. So this category is going to look at the category of all of your fields, but they're going to start with that key. So I only care about current and next year. So maybe in the summertime, our operations staff changes what terms from 2024 to 2025 are into what's current and what's next year. But I don't want to run this engagement modeling for previous students or students in the distant future. So whatever your institution use case is, this just allows you to have one place where you don't have to update this query individually. This is just going to update when during your cycle prep, you're updating this page. So we just say entry term active cycles. Okay, for time, I think if we have time, we can come back and do some more filters. But I do want to make sure we have time to go over everything to kind of get everyone up and running today.
David, see if there's any questions. Does anybody have any?
Yeah, we definitely stop.
Or
yeah, any questions on configurable joins, exports, filters so far?
And also, if you are using it and you're using it somewhat differently, or you think that, hey, have you thought about this? Anything like that is always helpful for the audience, that because this is a peer-to-peer conversation. It's not us just telling you, it's us kind of working with you. So any thoughts that way?
Yeah, and there's so many different ways in Slate, and especially in configurable joins. Some of the stuff I'm showing you might not be the most efficient way to do it. But as you get more involved with this, it's a little bit more flexible in how you're assigning points and maximums, but those might not be factors for you. So you can do, and we know the data is going to be correct. So we're just doing the simple multiplication or the simple addition. We don't need the case wins, especially if you have a massive database full of students. The trade-off for flexibility versus processing might not be there. But yeah.
And David, Benjamin says he would love to see more exports. So whatever. Yeah,
and we should definitely have some time, even if we run a little longer than the hour. We can chat more about the exports, and there's a lot of really fun ones that you can do, especially when you get into predictive modeling, like distance from campus, when they're submitting their application in the cycle versus when they're completing their application versus when they submitted it. There's so many fun things you can do with configurable joins, especially when you have the amount of data that an applicant does. This all right now is being at the prospect and inquiry level. So we just don't have access to as many data points. But when you're doing like the enrollment yield modeling, you have access to a lot of really fun data points. Yeah, any other questions before? And we'll definitely circle back to do more exports at the end.
Hannah says, can we see what the scores look like in use, like where they live in Slate, or how you use them to make decisions? So she wants a practical example if you can, David.
Yeah, so I would definitely say come back in 2 months for a lot of that. We're going to really lean into adding it to communications, adding it to the reader as an evaluation point or as just a data point. Today, we're focusing more on building the queries, automating the data export and import so Slate can build the score. But that is a really exciting, that's definitely a more exciting piece, is how to actually use this.
David, you just did a breadcrumb. You're like, or here, I'll give you some breadcrumbs for my next session. That was pretty slick how you did that.
Yeah, no, definitely so excited for all these workshops. And I think there's so much that can be done there. I'd love to hear what other folks are doing at that point. Okay, so yeah, we'll keep moving to do the scheduling the query. So Slate has this really fun ability where it will automatically run your query for you. You can drop it on your institution's SFTP server. You can drop it somewhere else, and we can just hop back to Slate to do that. So you have the Slate schedule export option. Once you are doing this, definitely make sure that's active. So you can do your institution's SFTP server, a lot of other options for you here. Typically, what it's going to do is going to drop it in your outgoing SFTP server that's assigned to your institution. But if you just give it the .. that just tells Slate, okay, I don't want it to go to the outgoing. Go back a step, and then incoming which is where if you have like the Common App or any kind of document vendor that's sending you documents, those are going to your incoming SFTP server that Slate can then pick up and process with a source format. So we want it to go into the incoming folder, and then we're just going to give the actual file a name. So this is, for this case study, it's just a demonstrated interest score for the admission office. So we'll just do ... // to put into the incoming folder, so Slate knows it can pick it up, and then a DI score for the name of the file. And then you can also add some dynamic variables, so like to basically timestamp it. We won't worry about that right now. You can do Slate's built-in secure transfer. If you have PGP, you can encrypt the file going out, and then you can code the PGP encryption, picking it back up. Definitely, I like to be notified when there's a failure or a late delivery. Sometimes Slate's a little bit later. Maybe there's too many people doing too many things on the server nodes. So I would definitely want to know about failures and deliveries. So it just emails me. And then the format, for this particular case, just do an Excel spreadsheet. Slate is pretty good at just picking that up and processing it as is. But if you're exporting this data somewhere else, then you might have some other limitations that you're dealing with. You can also have Slate not send an empty file. So if you filtered everybody out, maybe this is the beginning of the cycle, maybe no one is meeting your criteria, just don't drop an empty file to SFTP server, or you can just allow it to drop those empty files. And depending on your institutional need, you can have this file generate and sent at each of these delivery windows. So there's 5 delivery windows throughout the day, 7 days a week. So you could drop this 35 times a week. But if you have a really big database that's going to start slowing things down, maybe for you, maybe for the your neighbors kind of on the same server nodes as yourself. So if your institution doesn't need like very live up-to-the-date data, you can choose kind of these slower windows when people aren't in Slate doing things. You can choose Saturdays, Sundays, Fridays when people aren't as busy in Slate. And typically you're going to be doing a couple of different queries to calculate the behavior points, calculate any bonuses you're doing, and then one last query to calculate your total score. So it's helpful to kind of have these across your delivery windows. You could also code a lot of this into your rules. That's what I did when I first started this. I didn't like it. It was a headache to troubleshoot. I liked having a little bit more control over when this process was running. So I just do exported automated queries. And you don't really need to update the priority. But this just will allow Slate to pick up the data when you run it. So depending on how often you need live updated data, you can choose your delivery windows. And then let's pop over to our source formats. You know what, let's make this a little bit easier. We're going to run our data. It doesn't matter that there's no one here. It's just easier if you have your column headers in an Excel document so you can map them in your source format. So we're going to just download that. We're going to upload that blank data file and just do a new spreadsheet. You can choose a folder. So let's just do scoring. And we already told Slate to send an Excel spreadsheet, but if you chose something else, you could choose that here. We're going to send it to the person or a data set record that just gives you different prompts here. We just care about our person records. We're not doing any kind of data set. So we want to be able to update even applicant records since this is just an engagement score. Since all the records in our data file already exist in Slate, we don't want it to create new records. And let me just add that blank file, and we're going to upload. So now we have, it's waiting to be processed so we can build the import. Takes a second, it's just converting it to a usable data set so it knows the column headers, it knows the data inside. So these are all of our column headers. And if your thing doesn't have column headers, that's also something you can program. So in-person event score, I've already built a field, which we will get into in a minute. And I just have an event score field. if you have a small number of behaviors and a small prospect pool, you could probably just do all the calculations in your Slate query, but I would not recommend that that process. I think that there's probably going to be some troubleshooting as you stand the score up. And if you have a large group of students, it's just going to be easier if you're putting the number of points that people have associated with these behaviors as a standalone field. And we'll go over that more in a minute. So we can just save that. And if you need to do any kind of mapping, like static mappings, like a date, or if there are like prompts rather than just open source data, you can use the prompt value mappings. So I'll just run the import. And because we ran the import, we can now generate a source format. So we can start coding things like where to look at the SFTP server. We can activate it. Again, you can send notifications on failure. So I'd care about a failure of the query ring, but I also care about if the source format had a problem ingesting the data. So I'll just add my email there too. And it always helps when you can spell correctly. You can do some additional formatting here. So if you decided to use a PGP encryption code, you can put that in there. And then, so this import path mask is looking at this particular one is also already looking at your SFTP incoming folder. So we called it DI scoring. And then I think that's the file format. If you are using some kind of timestamp, you can add a wildcard, which in this case is an asterisk, and it just tells Slate if there's any file in that folder that is DI scoring any series of characters and then ends with that file format, the file type, then pick that file up and apply our mappings to it and digest the data added to your students. The one kind of word of caution is because we're going to be doing multiple queries, if your first query is DI scoring and then your second one is like, oh, I want to do one that's for international. Well, that wildcard is going to pick up that underscore international and it's going to pick up both files. So if you have different source formats for each file, just make sure that you're naming it in the scheduled export, something that's unique if you're using the wildcards to pick up multiple types of file names. Nothing else is super important there, so that's
So when
yes.
they save that file, that would have to have some thought through when you know that, hey, I want to pick up two type of files. I want it to be the similar name, but the last, is going to be different, but I want both of them. So that's where you would use that
Yeah. Yeah, I typically have a separate query that calculates some bonuses. So like, we'll go over bonuses in a minute, but if the mapping needs to be different for that bonuses file versus the behavior point file versus the total score file, I just want to make sure that when I am picking up those files, they have a unique enough name that one source format's not going to pick up all three different files. It's just an easy mistake to make of like, oh, I'm going to use DI scoring underscore something for each of my file types so I know what they mean. But then if you're using a wildcard to be more flexible with the file names you're picking up because you have like a timestamp or something like that, this is just going to pick up anything that in your incoming folder that is DI scoring any characters here and then file type. So it's just a word of caution. Okay, so let's pop back to
just a time check. David, you got about 25 minutes.
Okay, yeah. We're getting closer to the end. We just have a couple more topics to go over. So fields, we can pop back over to Slate, actually.
And
So like I said,
are you going to share the PowerPoint with them?
Yeah, I can definitely share the PowerPoint as well, along with the recording. There's not a whole lot going on in the PowerPoint, just kind of keeps me on track, but there are some notes, some presenter notes that might also help explain the process a little bit. So like I said, I like creating standalone fields for each of my points that I'm assigning to things like in-person events, number of messages being sent in the last 30 days from the student. That gives me a central place that has the actual points, not just the number of behaviors. It allows me to work with them a little bit more freely, whether it's in the engagement scoring, but also if I don't want to have to rebuild that complicated export that has this formula in it, I just have a field now that I can use. And then I would say be very clear with the naming description. Like I said, you might have a different demonstrated interest calculation for domestic students versus international students versus financial aid yes students. You might use different behaviors, you might use different points per behavior. So definitely name this very clearly, especially when we're getting to the predictive modeling. It definitely is helpful to have different predictive modeling models for your different groups. Like I said, international, domestic, financial aid, yes, financial aid, no. They're just very different populations that have different factors that have different levels of influence on their decision making. So big marquee flashing thing is just make sure that you have very clear names for your fields, just because you're going to have a lot of fields. I would also recommend hiding them behind a permission, because if you have 100 of these fields or 150 of these fields, or even more, if you're starting to do predictive analytics on opening emails, on retention, on alumni donating, these are definitely going to add up very quickly. So you probably don't want everyone in your office to have access to the data, but you also just don't want to clutter up everyone's query builder with 200 new variables that they're not going to use. So if you hide it behind a permission, that's just a little bit easier for everybody. And then so we already did the source format. So bonuses, just for sake of timing, we'll just briefly talk about this. There's going to be a lot of behaviors that maybe students can't or won't be able to demonstrate. Maybe students don't have to apply for financial aid, so they're not going to submit the FAFSA. But if someone submitting the FAFSA gives them 10 points, we have this whole group of students who aren't going to submit it. So you don't want to necessarily ding them or have it be a negative that they're not applying for financial aid. So one option is you can take the rest of their points. So maybe they had 50 points out of 100. And then you can reduce that to say like, oh, well then we're going to give them 5 out of the 10 points for the FAFSA submission, because their demonstrated interest as a whole is at about half of total. So you can kind of look at their total and reduce it to replace that not submitting the FAFSA, because they don't have to. Or if you are concerned about the equity and access of attending campus visits. So for people who don't attend a campus visit or on the road visit or whatever it might be, because they don't have the finances, they don't have the accessibility to do it, maybe they're an international student, it could be a million reasons why they don't attend a visit. But you don't want to penalize them completely. You can use kind of proxy behaviors. So you can see in this formula, so when the in-person event count is more than 0, so they did go to events, then just give them 0 points for this bonus. And we're using just messages sent by the student here. If they sent more than 5 messages, give them 20 points, which is that maximum number of points they're allowed to get in this bonus. Else, just take the number of messages they sent, multiply it by 4, and then end. So I think in this example, in-person events, they could score 24 points. So you could modify this like the most they could get for this bonus is 20 points. So again, there's still a little bit, they can't fully make up that difference, and each email is not as many points as an event, but again, just kind of allows you to start balancing your score a little bit more for these behaviors that not everyone's going to do. And it could be interviews, it could be anything that your students are engaging you with. Final score. So it's a very similar process. We're just aggregating your behavioral points into a query run. A source format's going to pick it up, assign that final value to a standalone field. You can add that value in your reader. You can add that in your student dashboard. There's a lot of different places that you can use it in your strategic recruitment and your marketing communications. But you'll have this very at a glance score. You're not having to manually look through interactions or look at like, oh yeah, they went to 3 events and all of that. You just have a score. And we'll kind of talk about some of the benefits and some of the shortcomings again in a couple of months with this automated score. But it's a really helpful tool that can guide a lot of your strategy and your action, but it is just a helpful resource point. You can also plug it into your reader so you can help new student training. There's a lot that we can be doing with this that we'll go into more in a couple of months. So yeah, we just used really a couple quick tools over the course of an hour to build the query, build some fields, build the source format that's going to automate the process. So again, you're not having to run the query every morning so that Slate can ingest it. If you do have that one-off meeting, maybe you want to know before admission committee, or you want to know before you do a really big mailing, you can manually run this and just upload it to that source format. There's nothing that restricts you to those delivery windows. But this is just an automated way to keep your new records and your existing records updated to your scoring rubric. So like I said, this is the first of 6 workshops. So the next workshop, we're going to be using Excel to actually figure out how many points we want to assign each of those behaviors, and also validating our individual behaviors and our total new score to, if you have a staff manual evaluation score on your historical records, you can validate to. Maybe you want to validate this against how likely they are to imply or how likely they are to enroll. So that's gonna be a really fun one. I like doing fun projects like that in Excel, so that's gonna be a really fun one that we have planned. And then again, that next one after that is when we're going to start talking about how to collaboratively build the score with your office, but also all the fun uses, whether that's in emails, reports, whatever it might be.
Hey, David, is that 629, not 529 for the next one?
I think that's 626. I apologize.
Gabriel might know.
6/26. Yeah, that's June 26th. Is what we're planning for the next one. It's gonna be the last Wednesday of every month, unless I like get hit by a bus or something. Which hopefully that doesn't happen. Yeah. So predictive modeling, strategic guides to. It's going to be a very similar process to building your predictive modeling. I like using binary logistic regression for the predictive modeling. So you can get a 0 to 100% likelihood someone is to, whether it's apply, enroll, retain, whatever it might be.
David, could our participants kind of like mock up as you go through this process their own version, so that each iteration and by the end of this series they'll have almost a design of what they would want in some form?
Yeah, definitely. I would love, as we're starting to build this, we kind of have our little cohort of folks who are building along with us, and we can have more interactive conversations around each of these workshops. Because like I said, Slate has so many different ways. The number of like presentations I've seen and I've done we're all just doing the same thing with really different versions of Slate tools. I'd love to see what everybody else is doing with this. I think there's a lot of fun ways to build it, a lot of fun ways to use it. So yeah, please, if you're building this along with me, and want to come off mute in these future workshops, and we can kind of compare notes and see what we're doing differently or the same, I think that's a great conversation we can have.
And David, we've talked about creating some office hours on Fridays where, folks can come in and just be able to, throw things at you, or is that something you're still thinking about doing, David, or?
Yeah, I think that'd be really fun. I think a group focused on building fun tools like this. Just last week, I had a really fun breakthrough on like a course recommendation and insights engine. There's so many fun things that you can do with Slate that really unlocks the data that you have access to in really strategic ways, and really impactful ways for students, for staff. So I'd love to have a group that, whether it's a user group, whatever it might be, that can come together and just chat about fun tools like this.
Yeah, as we start to build out our Beehive community around Slate, we'd love for anybody that's interested to be a part of that. Like I said, we always say your voice matters. So, David's just one of many experts that, like some of you are experts in certain things. We'd love for us to bring that up and bubble that up. So this could be a platform for you to showcase
to other folks, other peers. I know that we talked about Slate and it's Slate, but a lot of admissions, peers and even registrars and so forth are going to need to do this, right? So we'd love to build a community that allows us to share content like this together.
Definitely. And yeah, there's nothing marrying this process to Slate. Slate just has the fun configurable joins that makes this really easy. But yeah, really exciting projects. I definitely have a love for kind of the data and the marketing communication side of this. That's definitely where my slant's going to be at. But like you said, there's a lot of people in the room right now that have a lot of different experiences and viewpoints and strategies that are going to use this in ways that I haven't even thought of yet.
Are you gonna? You had a survey that you showed me yesterday, David. Are you gonna allow them to? So we of course are going to be at the summit in Chicago. So if you're there, would love to hang out, get coffee, go to dinner or something like that. Let us know. We have a actual conference, a virtual conference that we're going to host in mid-November. That'll be much more specific, and in that sense, a community will build that out with us, right? So anything that you think that we should talk about and build on, we are open to all suggestions. So
yeah, so this QR code right here will actually take you to a little survey we have to let us know if you'll be at Slate Summit and if you'd like to connect with us, or I think we have a dinner happening on Wednesday night. We'd love to get some folks attending that or just in the hallways of the conference. And then also if you want to reserve a spot, let me get back to this. If you want to reserve.
I also put the link in the
thank
chat.
you.
Yeah, I also put the link in the chat, so if anybody wants to use the link, they can use that too. But some of it is just for us to get to be able to stay connected with you, invite you to the right events, things like that, and just be more collaborative as we go. As I think we always, you'll see that we don't use this as a sales tactic. It's really more of a collaborative element. That's how our clients work with us in much more way. So, none of this is to spam you in any way. It's really for us to build the right community that you could leverage.
Yeah, and definitely the thought process behind the workshops. It's a very empowering series. You might have the staffing in-house in your admission office to work on Slate. You might have institutional research or faculty members who are really top-notch on the predictive modeling. So by the end of the year, we really want institutions to be able to do this. Giving best practices, tips, kind of how-tos throughout the year for folks to be able to stand this process up. So if you want to join the waitlist for any of these specific sessions, or you can also, there's a little email button if you want to send this to anyone else on campus or anyone from a different institution who thinks might be interested on this. And then, yeah, we'll be at Slate Summit. So let us know if you'd like to attend our dinner or just catch us in the hallways or for coffee. And then, like Matt said, we are planning to do a virtual Slate Summit conference in November. Myself, like a lot of people, were very disappointed when Slate did not bring back their big Slate Stage virtual webinars throughout the entire summertime. So we'd love to help facilitate folks who have really fun and interesting things that they're doing in Slate. So if you want to attend that Slate session, or if you're interested in presenting at this kind of virtual conference in November, just use this and we'll start reaching out to folks who are interested in presenting or attending.
Really quick, Lindsay says offsites would be fantastic. Maybe give us an idea of what in the Excel file so we can have a doc of their own version of their work for the next session. So
that's great feedback.
Yeah, I can definitely send out. So I have an Excel doc that I work with that's complicated, and then in that 1 hour, we're going to build a simpler version of the doc. I'm happy to send that simpler document ahead of the workshop, even if it's just the folks who attended here who might be interested. So you're not having to build.
Is that, David, is that more of a template so that then they can populate the Excel? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I definitely anticipate folks who are doing this are going to have to slice the data up in new ways. So having an Excel template where you can just drop your new data and it kind of just catches up and aggregates the new fields and new columns or new scoring is super helpful. So that's definitely what we'll building a template, which I'll send ahead of the folks for next month.
And before we close, we want to make sure, is there any questions, any comments or thoughts as we go through this process? We could
Hey, Matt.
certainly after. Yeah, go ahead, Gabrielle.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I wonder if we just stop the recording and then just let people talk.
Oh,
Is that okay?
yeah, we can
Okay.
end the recording.
Thank
Hold
you
on.
all for coming. We're gonna end the recording.
Thank you so much, everyone.